Hi, I'm Laura.
Hey, I'm Stefan, and you're listening to Attributed, a podcast library by Dreamdata.
The purpose of it is to store and share all the knowledge that we have gathered across Dreamdata employees through our LinkedIn Lives, podcasts, and webinars.
The typical topics you'll find here can be stuff like marketing,
Sales,
B2B ads,
operations,
social selling maybe.
Hello and welcome everybody to another attributed session delivered to you by Dreamdata. As usual, I'm Stefan. With me today I have Shaun Dix, which I'm briefly going to introduce to you. And I'm actually really excited to have Shaun joining today because he knows a lot of stuff about ads that I have never really given much thought to. I've probably mainly been driven by intuition and the experience. And I'm quite sure Shaun has studied kind of the actual science behind how ads actually work. And that's a very interesting topic for us because we typically talk about generating pipeline and revenue out of ads. But what actually makes a good ads? What makes it memorable? How do you want to serve it? What elements is part of a good ad? How do you make your ad stand out? And all these things, this is what I think, Shaun, you work with every day with the clients of Ipsos. So I'm super happy that you've said yes to join us. But Shaun, for those who've never heard about you, and there are people in the world that probably haven't that, like, who are you and what is it that the work you do at Ipsos is?
Thanks very much for inviting me, Stefan. And I'm responsible for creative excellence at Ipsos. So creative excellence is everything to do with advertising research, and kind of our mission and vision is to show how creativity and advertising can really make brands successful. So we look at the effectiveness part of it rather than the performance-based stuff you referenced. Not that that's not important, but that's kind of our bread and butter and what we do every day. Yeah, I lead a team globally, so that means I work across the 90 markets that Ipsos represents with 20,000 people. My responsibility, and it's a wonderful one, and I'm very privileged to have that, is with my team, develop the strategy, the vision, and the mission, which I will talk a little bit about today, the product portfolio and thought leadership and fame. And then we work in a matrix way with the countries to make sure that they, roll out what we're doing and believe in our vision and mission. And it's been a really cool, a great journey. You must remember, and you may not know this, Stefan, but Ipsos has been in research since 1975. So Didier Truchot, I'm going to see later today, started this company in 1975. So it's next year's the 50th, so half a century anniversary of the company. But when we started this company, we did a lot of work, even in those days, in advertising research, mainly post-testing. But so we have a long heritage and experience in the space and work with a variety of industries, brands, companies, which makes it very interesting and very fulfilling in a way.
Maybe you should also brag just a little bit for people to understand what type of brands is it that you normally work with for those you're allowed to mention.
Yeah, I mean, if you can think of any of the top advertisers in the world today, we work with all the big Fortune 500. I wouldn't say every single one, but most of the big blue chips and Fortune 500 companies, in the different sectors. So if you think of CPG or FMCG, it's the big ones, the Nestle's, the ABIs of the world, etc. We work for a lot of the big giant pharmaceutical companies, RX as well as OTC, so over the counter and prescription. It's a big part of what we do. Ipsos has an array of services broader than what I focus on. So we have naturally exposure to, these healthcare companies, pharma companies. We work in the public affairs sector, government, the hospitals, but obviously companies like platforms themselves. We do a lot of work with Meta, with Google, with TikTok, which is important because they need third-party companies to give that balance. You're in this business, you know it very well, and I'm sure your audience does too. We provide the balance, right? And I think that's important to have that balance. What else? We work with some of the
As you've already
talked about one.
Very legit, Shaun. Before we glide into today's topic of why ads work, it seems like the label advertisement research is like the specific thing you do. Could you maybe just exemplify a little bit for the people listening, like what is advertising research? What are the typical components that you guys carry out?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first, we cover advertising research, so anything. So we normally, what we do is talk about 3 different buckets or pillars, if you will. Cover the whole creative development process. So a company or an advertiser or marketer that's starting really from their first strategy, big ideas, platforms for their brands. We're going to start to produce those big ideas or core creative ideas. We work very closely with many of our clients in the space. We have unique methodologies that are very agency and marketing friendly and that have been delivering great work for many brands across the world. So this part of our business is very, very key. And it's becoming more and more important as marketers have access to so much more for media channels, right? And we talk about an array of touch points, but if you look at the big brands today, it's also about experiences, right? So Corona doing the sunset festivals around the world is obviously a reason they do that. You think of the Chinese car brands and what they're doing now. So that part of this pillar is a big part. We, in the middle pillar, we have creative assessment. So what that is, an evaluation of various different assets, whether it's a linear video, so TV, online video, social media platforms, static media like out of home or print. We evaluate those before they air in context normally, and that's key. And then lastly, we do post-test measurements as well, so in-markets measurement. And the thing that is important as well is joining the dot between all of these things and providing value and learning to our clients. I mean, I think that's why they do research in a way, also for the security and the substance, but they want to have some reassurance that what they're doing is the right thing, and the media money, the time that they put behind it, the production value, the craft, the sweat is going in the right direction. And I think we've been trying to pivot a little bit the way that we speak to our clients and the direction of what we talk about, so that this is seen as not the kill bill of creativity, but rather something that can help marketers nurture and be successful at the end of the day. And I think that that's super, super important.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. And I imagine the budgets that these guys roll with when they start distribution, then if you guys can help them correct, let's say, 10 or 20% more, then that matters immensely when they start putting the millions behind rolling out campaigns, right?
It does, definitely. I mean, you mentioned ROI at the beginning of the talk. I mean, that's, any CFO, CEO is going to ask the marketing team to define what success looks like, right?
Yeah.
And that's where we see our role as like part of that equation to help them justify and have the data and information to show that they're delivering that ROI. And we have many clients, I can't divulge the details, but who've done market mix modeling, independent market mix modeling with using our research methods, as well as a bulk of their own ads, and tested those in the market with this market mix modeling and seen a very high correlation to end market results, which is what you were referring to. Now, that's important because, yes, it's about creativity and the craft, but it's about, at the end of the day, business, right?
Yeah.
And even if you don't have a DTC business like direct to consumer or your click to buy, brands still have to feel confident in the way that they present their cases to the CFO. So we play a big role in that, in that sense. And I will say that as, getting advertising right, no matter what it is pretty tough.
Yeah.
And it's very complex. Some people try to simplify it and say that it's one thing or the other. It's humor, it's emotion.
Yeah.
I don't believe you can do that. That's just too simple.
This is probably a good place to just to do a segue and ask you the simple question to ask, but the hard question to answer. So if we start from the surface, in your opinion and Ipsos experience, then like what makes a good ad or what makes a bad ad? Like what are the components of ads that us marketers should be paying attention to that can be pushing them either in a good direction or a bad direction? And maybe even before you answer that, Shaun, what is the measures of what is a good ad?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, overall, people talk, if I simplify it into one kind of thing, the industry talks about effectiveness, and the paths to getting to effectiveness may be different, depending on the beliefs of that marketer and ad agency, by the way, because every ad agency has different beliefs on what the definition of creativity and advertising is. But I think the general consensus is that obviously the first, the primary condition for advertising to work is to get into the heads of people, right? And we know that our brains are wired in a way that they're prediction machines. So decisions that we make today and in the future are based on our past experiences. So we're wired to basically think about these things. And unfortunately, our brains are quite evolved. Obviously, we know that they filter out a whole whack of stuff, right? And so what happens is that this, what I would refer to as the culture of conformity, becomes a real challenge for the marketer. So that's the first hurdle, because we've been trained basically to conform the classroom, the corporate culture. We see those codes in advertising, definitely in automotive, the winding roads, the people, the features, B2B. We could talk about Apple. There are codes that are used over and over again. The trick is with that, and I paraphrase one of the great advertising legend, is that all of those things pass people like ships in the night.
One more time. I needed one more.
Yeah. So if you have these codes that people have learned over time, and you keep using them in your advertising, it just passes people like ships in the night. So they have what we would refer to in the old days as banner blindness. And so what's the first hurdle, was your question. Well, is brand attention. In other words, memorability, but branded memorability. It makes no sense if you remember an ad and you can't remember the brand. Or even worse, which happens a lot, is we get incorrect brand attribution or linkage. So I think it was an ad for Aldi, but actually it was an ad for Lidl. Yeah, that happens a lot, unfortunately, quite a lot. And so that's the first condition, because the primary condition for any advertising to work is for people to remember it. And that at that moment of choice, they will decide on your brand. And so what that means for a marketer and advertiser, that's the first thing we would look at. And if you think of the platforms and all the multiple sources of media we have, it has become a game of like, how can you create really strong stories, entertain people away? Entertainment, I just saw John Haggerty was talking about advertising is all about entertainment. We would definitely agree. But then there's the other part, which is important, which is shifting people's behaviors. So that's another KPI, short term and long term, not one or the other, but both. Yeah. And to get that right, you need to understand human truths. And so what are the human truths that you can unlock? What is the empathy that you can use to make your brand or your product or your service, or whatever it is you're trying to advertise, you get people to understand that very quickly, and your brand can deliver to that credibly. And I think that's very important. So we look at this behavior change piece as well. And there are other diagnostics, but I think those are the key components. And that's what we kind of look at. And then I'd say a last thing that's critically important, I referenced it already, is that while we say content is king, and it certainly is, context is king com. And so what we've learned at Ipsos and through our social Misfits learnings is that platforms, your advertising will behave differently in platforms, and things that are important for social memorability are not the same on YouTube skippables versus Instagram and Facebook versus linear. So that means the implications are for a marketer, you need to think about what you're going to put into those platforms. Otherwise, it will just definitely not be remembered and work. And so that's the challenge we have.
There's so many components that you can drill into here. I don't even know where to start. So what was the kind of like the bullets of what you just said, Shaun? Because there's so many different.
So the first thing, the bullets are generate branded attention. So memorability for your brand, right? That's the primary condition for advertising to be successful. Doesn't matter what the category is, government, B2B, whatever. That is the primary condition, and to link it to your brand. And there are things we look for within that, not to get into too much detail, but things like listening to brand assets, etc. The second component is behavior change, right? Short term and long term. Short term, are you call to action? Do you want people to do something with that would change their behavior, to visit a website, buy a product, or consider it for the future? Long term would be more closer to equity building, right? So generating closeness and relationships with your audiences, right? Your customers, your clients, your consumers. So those are the things we typically look at.
Really interesting. So I would love to hear more about, maybe you can exemplify I'd love to talk more about this kind of short-term versus long-term impact of ads, because I know this is something I see in my LinkedIn feed being discussed constantly. Do we just need to generate visits to a website or emails picked up? Do we want to position the brand for like long-term success? What would be the typical short-term measures you would apply to kind of see an immediate uptick? And what is it that you then risk by going heavily on the short-term impact?
So I will just say from the get-go that I don't think it's one or the other.
No,
I think it's both, right? And so which marketer would forget about the brand in the long term by just pursuing the short term? Let's make it concrete. So let's talk about telecommunications. that's a battleground that's very tactical, right? Promotional, based on, handsets or the speed of your line, the reliability of the connection, right? So the tactical and promotional advertising is really going to push those things and the agendas, maybe the fiberglass access to fiber lines in your neighborhood. So Deutsche Telekom might be pushing that. But there's always going to be elements of the long term in the short term commercials because they want you to see the magenta T of T-Mobile or Deutsche Telekom. They want you to notice that. They want you to feel that the pieces of advertising are connected somehow. So they talk about the strapline or claim is connecting your world. So obviously they want to have that big idea ingrained into the short term promotional pieces of advertising, which will happen on a regular basis. Might happen in print, might happen in what you've mentioned, LinkedIn, etc. And then you'll have your longer term equity building ads that's more about the halo of the mothership or the brand per se. And I'll just keep it to Deutsche Telekom to keep it simple. They did a wonderful job in Germany when they created a campaign called Gegen Hass Online. So what it means is against hate online. They created basically a campaign that shows what they stand against, not for, against. So they stand against social bullying and hate online. They created this big equity copy. I would call it an equity copy because it's not promoting anything tactical or product per se, but it's their brand. They've done a brilliant job of that. They won the Grand Effie in Leipzig. By the way, we have partnership with Effie as well. So that's another thing that we do that's very important to us and to Effie. But I was in Leipzig last year in Germany and I saw the Deutsche Telekom getting their award for that. And that makes sense because they're doing both really, really well. They also brought out another campaign called Ella Without Consent, which is all about using children's pictures online and showing parents what a danger that can be with AI and machines and stuff. So the idea behind that is that they're building their brand. And it's no surprise to see that Deutsche Telekom is number one telecom brand in Germany, number one in Europe, by the way, and the ninth most valuable global brand there is. And by the way, in the US, T-Mobile is basically pretty much in the lead race, at least number one or two.
And so what is it that a brand achieves, Shaun, when they go with these more cultural messaging or like point of views as opposed to buy our phone right now? What is it what do you do to the consumer by like, lifting your values to a higher place than just like a commercial transaction?
So it's an interesting question, and I will just take one step back to say what world are we living in right now? So what Ipsos does is we've just released our 10th edition of our global trend study, which covers all sorts of trends around the world. And one of the things we see becoming a massive issue is we talk about the poly crisis, right? So there's different things going on. There's wars, many wars going on, more wars than have been going on for many, many years. It's not just actually happening in Ukraine and the Middle East. There's a lot more going on. So we have that as a challenge, right? We've had economic challenges. We have environmental challenges, etc. People feel quite, and then we also have people who feel like they need to live in the moment. Lots of these things are all coming together, which impact the way people feel about society and in general. And so by doing these surveys, what we uncovered actually is that people don't really trust or have hope or faith in politicians. No surprise there, probably. As we all know, it's a bit of a gray area. But they do have faith and trust in brands. They think brands can do more for the world and brands have an important role to play there. So why am I telling you that? Because that's exactly it. That's an opportunity for brands to do more. Now, easier said than done. Because if you do something, let's talk about purpose. You do something in that area, what is the definition of purpose in the first place, and you can't credibly live up to that, you're going to get taken to the cleaners, right? So you need to be conscious and cautious of what you do and what you can credibly do. So Patagonia obviously is one of the examples that's been spoken about at Cannes Lions Festival of Creativity many times. This year, the focus was on their campaign about repairing clothing. So they had this wonderful campaign to show that you as a consumer can take any piece of clothing to any Patagonia store and get it repaired for nothing. Even if it's a pair of Levi's, you can get it repaired at a Patagonia store. Patagonia can do that because they've been basically hammering that kind of positioning, messaging out for a long time. And so it's credible, right? So I think there is more that brands can do. I mentioned Deutsche Telekom. I'm in Paris today in France. Orange Telecommunication have done a wonderful job. for women's football here through their campaign. So there are many, many examples, but I do think brands can play a role, and that's an opportunity.
Yeah, I want to try to make a few chapters here. So if we go a little bit back to the like what makes an ad work, and I know you guys also just released a book called Misfits, which I guess is that
There it
was right there, which is about how brands can stand out or like go against the normal stream of conformity. If we were to kind of including me, like making me understand, if we start from scratch and have to make an ad, how do we take that misfit concept of not choosing the path of conformity as you talk about? There must be some secret sauce you need to insert here because you have your audience. Let's say in our case, it's B2B marketers. We know a lot about what they like, but then you're asking us to come with something that they did not expect. There must also be a risk for a swing and a miss sometimes if you go too much off course on the misfit path. So what is the kind of recipe to do the misfit path in a good way?
Okay, so we don't have a recipe for, just to be clear, a recipe, because that would be a little bit too optimistic. But what we do have is a framework, and we believe that these things work. So let's start with the definition of misfits, because if you look at Oxford Dictionary definition, you'll think this is a bad thing, and typically that's the imprint you have in your mind, right? But we're not talking about misfits in that way. We are talking about misfits, and you said that, being non-stereotypical, breaking through the shackles of conformity, but adding value to their end audience in a different or unique way, right? That's what our definition of misfits is. And so we use popular culture as an example of that. I often speak, and people who have heard me speak, I often reference David Bowie as one of the great legends out there who was a misfit in his own right, right? He looked outside to other things for inspiration and used that as his a kind of, let's say, secret sauce for creating his music and some of his fashion things that he did. And so that's what we refer to when we talk about misfits. And I think so these two things are being balanced. On the one hand, let's talk about B2B, and the challenge you have is that, like, B2B is a special category. We shouldn't be too, bold and brave because it's business people. They are human beings. They remember and decide things the same way we would.
Yeah.
So there's no reason why you should not do something that's non-conventional and break out of the pack, but understand your audience, because the end value part is important. Have empathy for your audience. So I was at the ARF Ogilvy Awards a few weeks ago. It's a big event, Advertising Research Foundation in New York. They have this big event every year. Ipsos is a key sponsor, and I'm very proud to say one of the winners, and we had several award winners, was one of our clients. He's a B2B client, and it's Intuit MailChimp. Okay, so they do email marketing. They won a gold for their campaign, which is turning customers into customers. And so and we can post the link to the ad later on in the comments here, so folks can see that example of that ad. But they're designed really, or they produced really an attention-getting metaphor for the clusters of customers, because they uncovered through research that we did with them that there was this issue about too complex, not enough understanding of these audiences, and there was an actual opportunity to hit on that messaging and show that they understand how they can break that up and turn these cluster into customers. And I think that's an example of actually something quite simple, but you have to have the idea first, right? So that's the tricky part. But I think doing the research, they did a lot of research with us and some other companies to refine the story, to get a creative route that could not only work in one market, by the way, it worked in several markets, right? So we're talking about multiple markets. And that's why it won a David Ogilvy Gold Award this year. So I think, that's applying the Misfits mindset. I haven't gone into granular detail on it, but it's on the one hand, using research to uncover, what stories can we tell that are original, that are unique to the industry. So this is one, and you will see that in the visuals represented in the video when you look at it. How can we make sure that the audience that we're targeting, so marketers in this case, business people, understand it, get it, and will remember our brand for it. Remember what I said earlier, very important. So that's what Misfits tries to help marketers or advertisers do, understand in a bit more granular detail, how can they use 3 different buckets to basically improve, refine their advertising. And we're not taking the job away from the creative agency, not at all. providing inputs, information, and value to creative agencies and marketers so that they can just be sharper, better, improve their performance. And that's basically the role of what we're doing with Misfits. And I will say one more thing is what we're doing now is obviously doing this analysis we've done on our giant database of ads that we've done, but we've done this also with Effie as well. Look at it, Effie winners to see, which Effie winners have this Misfits mindset. So yeah, that's a little bit on Misfits.
I think anybody who's running digital ads nowadays is feeling that the competition is ever intensifying, and as all these platforms work as marketplaces,
Right.
prices just goes up, and the only countermeasure to that is that the content, the creative that you're putting in there into that auction really appeals and also misfits in a good way that actually makes the people that are studying, probably people and most people are not studying ads, but consuming the ads makes them actually build an empathy for this brand because the story is appealing to them in a new way and not in a very conform way.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I can see one of the questions is, can you give an example? Maybe Stefan, I can go straight to it.
I'll pull it up here. I didn't know if you
Yeah.
wanted maybe
No,
there's
yeah,
classic ones where it wouldn't.
I don't think it's also our role to kind of like, be too negative about, and, marketers work and ad agencies work. They put a lot of hard work into that and it's not easy. I will just say that before I say what I'm going to say, because I referenced two ads that I thought were not very good. And then one that I think that is good that was referenced as not good. So there we go. So three. So first one was Apple, the iPad Pro ad that was called Crush. Yeah. So the story with that is the creative and design community on LinkedIn went absolutely bananas, said you can't do that. That metaphor is ridiculous and you're killing our creativity. Well, yeah, in a way that was what the metaphor was there for. We tested that ad in Creative Spark, our pre-testing tools, so our best-in-class pre-testing tool, and we saw basically that ad did get average results. Nothing, not the norm, which you would normally expect from Apple, which is best-in-class, but not to the extent that LinkedIn were killing them. So what does that mean? I mean, if we were working with Apple, we aren't. They don't do a lot of pre-testing. But if we were working with Apple, we would probably tell them, hey, you should have understood the metaphor a bit better and maybe thought about this a bit better. And look, if you're in the final stages, do you go with it? Sure, maybe. Apple can probably afford to still wear that. They decided to pull it, right?
Okay, I actually didn't know that they
they apologized for it and they pulled it. Dramatic, maybe, but okay, they did it. So then Samsung came out a few days later and they had an ad with this girl who goes into this like warehouse with a lot of art lying around and paint and an old guitar lying on the floor. She picks it up. It's a bit battered and bruised, sits on a chair, starts singing and playing this guitar and the screens. Then it's a Samsung screen and says, Samsung, creativity cannot be crushed.
Yeah.
Well, beautiful from Samsung to do that. Clever, absolutely. I don't think really in line with what they normally do, but good. Okay, so there's that, and that's not necessarily best in class. There was one from Nike we were talking about earlier that was aired in the Olympics that we tested as well, was really bad. And so, I think even the bigger brands that we know as examples of really great stuff that they normally produce, on a rapid rate, and have some of the best agencies in the world can sometimes have weak advertising. And then there's one other one that I want to reference, and then I'll stop, is Levi's new ad that was released a few weeks ago, which was with Beyonce. And she's dancing in a laundrette and puts her jeans into the washing machine. There were a lot of people saying online that that's not a good ad. They preferred the one from the 80s or whatever it was. Actually, we tested that ad in our AI tool, and it does fine. It works well. And so it's, always remember what the data says. We can be judges of creativity, but what we're trying to do is bring in the data to give us, some kind of more objective point of view, not subjective point of view.
That's exactly what I wanted to ask you, Shaun, because it's a field I don't know too much about. And then what is the data then? Like when let's say you run a test and you say it didn't do bad or it didn't do good, what is the numbers that are coming out of the machine or the words that are coming out of the machine? What is like levels of measurement that you guys can investigate?
Yeah, well, we have, we obviously have global databases, market level databases. So we always compare country level score to that country specific and it takes the category and brand size and all of that into account. So what we're able to do is to give it's an index number. So the numbers that are below 70 are normally poor, depending on the country, because
So you show the ad to a representative amount of people, and they then score it, or how does it
No.
work?
So it depends on where you are in the process. If we just evaluating ads, what we will do in our methodology, and for this specific methodology, is place the ads in context. So we will have in digital environments, it will be placed in a YouTube environment or a TikTok environment in context, and the respondent or the person will have that same experience as if they were on their phone scrolling through TikTok or YouTube or Instagram. Why do we do that? And there's enough clutter and noise around it because we want to replicate the environment as much as possible and test the memorability of the ad in that environment. Now, that's very important because if you just show an ad to somebody and expect them to judge it, 99% of people can't do that. So you need to test it in context. So for platform-based advertising, we inject ads into the platforms, we test them in the platforms, and then we have some diagnostics afterwards to get into the granularity. For linear video, for TV and online video, we have kind of like a media environment where we are creating basically in behavioral science principles, we would call this cognitive load. So we're creating a certain amount of forgetfulness, if you can call it that in layman's terms, to allow basically for that experience to be equaled out, because obviously we're not going to show a sitcom or something like that, which we used to do in the old days.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is getting a really true measure of that brand attention I mentioned before, that KPI. And then maybe just one more piece, and I don't want to get too technical, but there's also
I love it.
Yeah, there's also a pre and a post shift, like you have in what you know from AB or brand lift studies, right? You look at test and control and look at the delta between the two. Pre-post is the same. Pre is pre-exposure to any advertising, and then post. And what you're doing is measuring, observing the shift between the two, right? So the difference is the advertising in that environment. And we're looking at the lift. And that's very important because if you start asking people when you're evaluating advertising in a finished or animatic format, direct questions, you're going to get, most people can't articulate why they choose certain things or why they want certain things. So you need to allow for enough cognitive load. You need to respect the context because that's what's happening out there. And the problem is if you do what you just said, show them the ad and ask them a bunch of questions, you're going to end up with a false negative or a false positive. So you're going to get green, go on air, and then you're going to measure their performance and it's going to come back really bad. Well, no, go figure. You tested it in an environment that doesn't really represent what's going on out there.
Yeah.
Which is quite tough, quite actually, to get right. So that's the challenge. That's what we're trying to do in that little piece. I think if we are assessing earlier creative, it doesn't need that. But
it's very interesting to hear what the rich can afford when they make their ads. It's super interesting, all the granular details that you can work on. I wanted to ask you kind of what makes a good ad today? Is that an evergreen thing? Will it stay the same, or will it change 5 years from now? Or what makes a bad ad? Is there an evolution here, or is it the same elements 40 years ago as 20 years from now? How do you view that?
so there are certain elements that remain constant, so the things that really, like story arcs, where human beings love to listen to stories, right? So good stories, well told, always deliver good results, right? So that's like a common theme. Stronger stories will do that.
Yeah.
I think in the environment we live in today, and certainly as we move into more platform, even more platform based, the role of entertainment will play a bigger role because you're not only competing against other advertising, you're competing against content. So we do a lot of work with the entertainment companies, and that's the big challenge that they have, right? Is competing with other streaming options out there in content. So I think the role, this entertaining point has become more and more important. I think certain things like originality, of course, the same as it has been for many years. Things that drive popular culture are still important for getting into people's heads. I think what's new for us, at least from our findings and research, what we can say is this notion of empathy. And we've heard a lot in the past about emotion, how important emotion is. And it is important, but it's an ingredient. It's not the solution to everything. It's an ingredient. Empathy is 4 times more stronger an emotion. And because empathy unlocks insights, things that are true to humans that your brand or your service, your product can reliably ladder up to. And if we think of some of the most successful brands or products or services out there, they unlock those levels of empathy. They understand their audiences really, really well. I told you the Intuit MailChimp example. That's a good example. I could talk about many of the clients we work with who've done a brilliant job of that. And there are many examples in the industry of brands that have just done that successfully over time. So this notion of understand empathy is going to be important. And why will it continue to be even more important as we move into more platforms is because of the research we released at the beginning of this year. We saw in social media platforms that that's actually more important for some of those platforms. So authenticity, what TikTok speaks about, being native, right? And being not as polished sometimes when you're social media. Unpolished stuff can be just as good as polished, by the way. I think those are the things that are changing. I have some wonderful colleagues around the world, excellent teams. I have a great guy in the US, Ryan Mitchell, who works with some of these clients that I mentioned, and he was talking to me about like what some of the challenges are. And he was saying on the topic of empathy, so I'm reading my note because I have to read it, is B2B ads are around 2 times more likely to use solely tangible and intentional approaches in their advertising. So there's a great opportunity for B2B advertising to be a lot more focused on empathy. Why not? You can do that. It doesn't mean because you're in B2B, you have to do things like you've done in the last 10 years.
No.
And the other thing I would say, one other thing, maybe just to leave the audience with is leverage your distinctive brand assets. Distinctive brand assets. And distinctive brand assets can be many things: colors, codes, sound. And these things need to be consistently invested on. Needs to be some level of continuity. The logo in the right-hand corner or the name in white font is not going to do enough. So the distinctive brand assets, it's where B2B creative is really falling short. 3 times less likely to B2B companies to use that. And so there is a wonderful opportunity here to do that. And you can see Bakaran's comments. So I don't know if you see that there. She actually works for Ipsos.
Yeah. I feel like this is almost an opportunity to invite you back in 6 months to just go into all these distinct assets, Shaun, because
I would
it
love
looks
to do
like
that,
a
yeah.
complete new topic.
Yeah.
But one thing that I wanted to ask you to summarize the learnings, but you actually just did that by predicting what worked in the past and what's going to work in
Yeah.
the future. I guess one of the prerequisites that I really take with me from that is that you really, 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 really need to understand the people that you're communicating to with your ads.
Right.
Because otherwise, there's no chance of empathy, a good story, or any of that. Because those are the guys, the girls that would understand the story. Besides the big scale kind of Ipsos research, if low practical things, how do you build these kind of relationships to the audience you want to reach?
Get to know them. Get to know them. I mean, there are many great marketers that use that analogy. I was speaking to the chairman of Unilever a few years back at a social event, the former chairman of Unilever, and he was saying, one of the reasons why they were so successful with Axe and a number of their brands is because they made it kind of their number one priority to understand their audiences incredibly well. And by the way, that's what Intuit MailChimp has done here. Has understood what the challenge was, their audiences, what they need, what they couldn't see it, the wood for the trees, that basically was in front of them. But having those earlier conversations with the audiences is going to give you the granularity. Now that I would say, if I was going into this as a B2B client, try to change your research spend to just looking at after the effect. Put more focus on the front end, because the front end is going to give you more, bang for your buck, if you will. So just by knowing who your audience is, what human truth can we unlock? What can we reliably ladder up to? What ideas could we get from this, from our visits to our customers? I mean, there's some companies who do a wonderful job of this all the time. I fly a lot. So Virgin is a perfect example of just absolutely understanding their people. So I could go on about.
Yes. Okay. I really just want to ask last question, then let you go, Shaun. You mentioned human truth both in the beginning and here in the end. What is the one-liner description of what is human truths that we should be searching for?
I think it's what's important, what's relevant to them, what's important to them, what's credible for that category product or service, let's say. But what's really relevant to them. And I think, if you think of something very simple, washing your clothes, of course you wanted the shirt whiter than white. But actually, the opposite of that is that dirt is good because I know my detergent, so Unilever again, is going to do a really good job. So it's about unlocking what's really relevant to your audience and what you can credibly deliver on. And I think, that's simple as it is. And and it's not rocket science.
No,
It's not rocket science.
that Adam will, go have a coffee with your customers,
Right.
have a beer with them, meet them somewhere at a conference, invite them to a Slack call, Google call,
Start
whatever.
there and start there and start to build. We always have this, and you kind of mentioned that the cost of research. The cost of research is about this small. You can hardly see it in relation to production and
Yeah. Yeah, and distribution half the
yeah, exactly. So I would say think about the equation and the balance and the return you can have after that. There's plenty of studies that show that. So yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, Shaun, I'll not take more of your time. If people want to speak with you or Ipsos, what is the path for them to take?
Yeah, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Obviously, they'll see my details from this session here. That's absolutely fine. They can also email me, shaun.dix@ipsos.com. I'll reply. I might be a bit slower than LinkedIn, but I will reply at some point. But yeah, happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you for inviting me, Stefan, and thank you. Also, if you want to do another session, I'm game, my man.
You've already name dropped so many topics I don't know about, so that might be very likely. Shaun, thank you so much for teaching me and all of the listeners all this today, and we'll probably be back with more questions.
We hope you like listening to us. Subscribe to our podcast and the ones that we have been guests on.
And if you have any feedback for us, just do let us know. And should there be a guest that you think we should be talking to, then pitch us.
We're looking forward to seeing you.